All right, I think with that, we probably should get started. We have a relatively full agenda, relative being an underestimation here, I think. Welcome, everybody, to this first full-length virtual exceptional MPI forum meeting. I don't know how many other adjectives I can add. So unfortunately, we were supposed to be in Munich, and I can report the weather is fantastic today. Unfortunately, we have to meet over this medium, so hopefully we can make up for this soon again and be in person again in one room. Probably not this year, but hopefully next year at some point again would be nice. In the meantime, we'll still want to make progress. We want to get to MPI 4, and this meeting will hopefully get us much closer to that. We'll talk about this at the end of the meeting. How we, what are the next steps? So what is the timeline we want to pursue, depending on how some of the reading go. We have a relatively full agenda. Wesley is showing it right now. We're going to meet all days, all 3 days, for 3 hours from this time now, so from 9 Central to noon Central, whatever this means for your respective time zones. We have 2 voting blocks. There's also something different from typically what we usually do to give us more flexibility. We'll use the first voting block tomorrow to get rid of everything that we have already discussed, and then everything that's left over from that we'll push to the meeting block on Wednesday. So also here gives us a little bit more flexibility. I would like to start with the procedures because those are hopefully relatively simple and we can actually put them in place then. And then my suggestion would be to start with the semantic terms, since this is the biggest item that we have. This will be a full reading today. And then if there is still feedback for that needs to be taken into account, which we of course never have in a reading of a big ticket in this group, then at least it just gives the group some chance to go back and reiterate and make sure that we get it through in this meeting. That's why the order is chosen this way. Most of the erratas that we're going to read should be relatively uncontroversial because most of them have been read already informally in the Wednesday meetings. So this is just the official repeat, and the erratas, most of them come from the cleanup pass that Bill made when he went through the whole document, and there were various issues that were associated with that. And some of them are not even votable. They're basically just for information to make sure that nobody has any objections against one of these more editor changes or things that were considered more editor changes. So we'll go through that as well. I think since this typically doesn't help much and we see each other's names on the agenda, most of them, as we hopefully had with affiliations, probably doesn't make much sense to do an introduction round. I think it would still be helpful to go through the working groups real quick to see if there's any update from the working groups. If not, that's fine too. But if there are, we should talk about them real quick so that people get on the status. I think most of the work is connected to MPI 4, and if that's covered in the rest of the meeting, then just say that. But if there's anything else, let's just get an update from everybody. Is there anything from the collective communication group? Tony,
just made it on the call. So we are been lately reviewing the tickets that Wesley sent us for editorial changes and chapter changes, but we've also been looking at some clarifications here and there on partition communication and possibly a ticket for 4.1. We're also looking at reviving another ticket for 4.1. So I think basically we got the partition chapter ready for the reading this time. And that was, and the other things have all been those editorial changes we've been working on. But we're starting to move to 4.1 thinking at this point, honestly, in the group.
Okay, this is good to know for people who want to join that. What do you say reading for partitioned? I thought that's up for.
Sorry, voting. Sorry, I said the wrong word. Sorry.
Okay, you gave me a little shock there. Okay, thanks.
No, voting. I'll get killed. Sorry, voting. Anyway, so the other answer is although we have met a little sporadically in between with all the virtual MPI forum meetings, those are not happening. The forum, it does meet 10 a.m. on Wednesdays Eastern U.S. time, and we'd like to get people to start coming to the meeting again. We've had the key people have shown up for key discussions, but we've lost a lot of our attendees, and we hope to reinvigorate that attendance in the coming weeks.
Okay, so that's a call for action for everybody. Thanks, Tony. Fault tolerance?
So we've been mostly pushing forward the various error-related tickets that we've been working on lately, and that I guess the forum has seen most of. There'll be one more. I think we're just no. We have a reading this week. Sorry, I've lost track of what I'm doing. We do have one more reading of a smaller error-related ticket. As far as the larger fault tolerance efforts that we've been pushing forward with fine and coarse grain recovery, those are still moving forward, largely still independently right now, because the work that Ignacio has been leading with the proposal that we've seen before called RIANET is still, he's still moving forward on getting that turned into something that's in standardese that we can start to review. So we're going to be looking at both of those hopefully soon. Tony has mentioned that he'd like to come and discuss some FA-MPI related topics. So we're going to be hopefully discussing all of those over the next few months, and then how we can have all of those meld together when it's appropriate. And so all of that will be happening in the working group for 4150 whatever.
Okay. Thanks. Guillaume, do you have an update from the hardware topologies group?
Not really. So we have we discussed we published Rolf's proposal. So it's going to make a new reading of this today, and oh yes, and we had a couple of meetings. It was in February or March, and but we have to resume the work in the working group. So it's been rather quiet for the past couple of weeks / months, obviously. But once this is over, we're going to resume the work with more conferences and more meetings.
Okay, thanks. Hybrid, Jim, you are normally listed here. Do you have any update for this? What this working group is going in general?
No, I don't have any update. We haven't met recently that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if there's anybody else who has anything they'd like to share. I think, thinking toward 4.1, I think we'd like to re-engage the working group and start taking a closer look at things related to using MPI with GPUs. And so hopefully we'll see this working group starting to become much more active again.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, when you're ready for this, just call for people on the mailing list.
Okay, we'll do.
Cool. Large counts, I think we can skip that. I think this comes to a conclusion with the current proposal that we have, unless somebody has something else to say to this point at the moment. Okay, persistence we probably covered already, right, Tony? Tony?
I think, yes, I mentioned, let me just say one other thing about persistence. Sorry, Martin, I was probably too terse for once. We also are considering additional proposals for extending persistent into MPI 4 and 1.1 and beyond, but nothing other. There's a ticket for 4.1 for persistent collectives that we're planning to bring back that we didn't quite get into the voting scheme on the ordering info argument. Other than that, we're looking at MPI 5 things. There's likely to be a merger of partitioned and persistent in MPI 5 proposal where we end up having partition collective. But other than that, you sort of heard it. I think that covers everything. Nothing other than future work going on persistence right now, and a specific ticket for 4.1.
Sounds good. Thank you. Dan, you want to say something point to point?
I'm not sure there's much to say at the moment on point to point. There's no real proposals that I'm aware of. Happy to entertain anybody's ideas on what to do in that.
Okay. Does anybody have any update from the RMA working group? I don't see Rajiv or Bill on the call right now. Okay, if nobody has an update, we'll go on.
I don't think there was any activity.
Okay, that's kind of been consistent with what happened lately. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Can I just drop in a question? I was looking at the hybrid group, but I don't see how to subscribe to any mailing list there. I would be interested in joining that too.
So in general, for any mailing lists that you'd like to join, you can go to lists.mpiforum.org
Okay.
and
Okay.
find them all, I hope, there. I think there's a wiki page that has all of this, but it's easier to just do this.
Okay. Thanks.
And then if you want to get access to any of their internal repositories, just contact the chair directly and they can do that for you.
Thanks, Wesley. Semantic terms, Rolf, Corey, do you have anything else besides the large ticket being read starting today?
Not really. Rolf has some additional issues that he wants to cover for 4.1, but other than that.
Thanks. Dan, sessions.
So yeah, we've got the big ticket for 4.0 that's being voted on this meeting, and we're having fairly regular meetings about a sessions 2.0. You know, what comes next. In particular, looking at how the how sessions interacts with or can make dynamic processing, the dynamic world processing better. So things like ComSpawn and Connect Accept and so on. Is there a better way of doing that? And what does the isolation of sessions? How does that affect the concepts in that part of MPI? So it's mostly focused around the idea of bubbles at the moment. That name may well change, but then it may not in the same way as sessions didn't throughout the last few years. But that's the general idea. If you're interested, we meet weekly, roughly.
Okay, thank you. Tools. Marc-André, you're here, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
So in the past months, we've been working on two erratas that we're going to have for vote today or in this meeting. Beyond that, we've been mostly discussing larger parts that I would probably target for 5.0, which is QMPI, like PNMPI inspired callback-driven replacement for PMPI. And also, in the past months, we've been discussing a handle introspection interface. Joachim Potzer from Aachen was leading that so far. And so at some point, we're probably going to get into a rhythm again where we have like every other week, either a debugging topic or a performance tool topic. For one, I would probably target some clarifications and smaller stuff for the chapter.
Great, thank you. Any questions for any of the working group leads at this point? Okay, well, if not,
You did mention the big count. We do have big count also coming up. It's the ticket still is live. That large count.
That's what I said. That comes hopefully to a conclusion with the big votes and the big count, right?
Yes, excellent. Just want to make sure that didn't get forgotten. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. All right, it's great to see that the working groups are starting to shift to 4.1 and 5.0 at this point, already starting to take up new items. So if you're interested in that, please join the appropriate working groups. Perfect. So with that, so Wesley, I forgot to ask before, any other housekeeping items you wanted to announce before we get going? Anything I forgot?
I don't have any major things. Just as a logistical point in terms of the WebEx, I'm going to be somewhat active in muting folks. I understand we're all at home, and so we all have background noises, and please don't take it as judgment if we hear some background noise and I just preemptively mute people who forgot to mute themselves. I just want to help you avoid any sort of embarrassing situation and distraction. Other than that, I know there are a lot of new folks here this week, and we're very happy to have you. If at any point you're trying to get access to some pull request or some discussion we're having and you can't seem to do that, it's most likely a problem of permissions on GitHub, and I can help you out with that. So just send me an email. Hopefully you have my email already from the mailing list. If not, you can just send me a chat on WebEx. We also have a Slack, and there's links to that on our on the wiki page on GitHub, so you can join that as well. And I think that is all I can think of right now. If I come up with something else later, I'll let you know.
Sounds good. Thanks, Wesley. So with that, actually, Wesley, it's on to you. You, I assume, presenting the pull requests on the rules, right?
Right. So I have a couple of those. Let me bring that over to this window. Ah, see, now I'm not logged in.
If you see that, you need to talk to Wesley.
Yes. Yep.
So just to, at least while Wesley brings this up, we have two suggestions to amendments for the rules. One kind of brings our procedures back in line with what we do in GitHub, so a new workflow, and the other one is how do we assure a proper succession for the officers of the MPI Forum. Those have all been read before and discussed before in the informal meetings. And so the idea is now to read them here officially, and then if there's agreement on them, put them up for vote tomorrow in the voting block. And with that, they will become active immediately.
Correct. Neither of these would really have an impact on anything at this meeting or even the next meeting, but it's easier to just go ahead and take care of it now. And that way, if there are any concerns, we've got plenty of time to get this fixed before we do really need them closer to the end of the year. So like Martin said, there's two pull requests I'm going to discuss here. The first one is relatively small. This one is pretty much just changing some of the rules about how we conduct the release candidate meeting and the final ratification meeting. For those of you who might have been around for 3.1, this was the meeting we had in Portland once where the release candidate meeting is where we went through the entire standard document. I think we divided the standard up into chunks of 20 pages or something, and each person got a chunk that they would go through and kind of check to make sure that things looked correct, the formatting was correct, and perhaps some consistency checks, things like that. Because of the way we have moved from Subversion to Git and from Track to GitHub, the way we conduct our business just from a logistical perspective has changed a little bit. And so some of our procedures were a little out of date because they needed to reflect our new workflow. So this is really just designed to capture that. And a lot of this is actually a simplification because the old way we did things with Subversion was that chapter committees and chapter committee chairs in particular would be more responsible for merging in the changes proposed by the various people in the forum. And now that we use Git and GitHub, those are all done somewhat automatically through pull requests, and that has made it much more accurate. It's harder for someone to copy those changes into the standard incorrectly when it's all part of the process. So that does simplify things as we get closer to the end. So so these changes are here to reflect that. So I've removed a few things. So the first thing that was removed over here is that chapter committee chairs no longer need to go through and specifically integrate approved changes that have been made since the last release of the standard, because that happens kind of all the time. However, we do still want chapter committees and chairs and the like to still go through their chapters, look for these minor non-semantic fixes that we've discussed. So that has been pulled over to the right side. So the new text says, chapter committees review changes to their chapters to ensure that approved changes have been integrated accurately into the MPI standard document and integrate minor non-semantic fixes into the MPI standard document if necessary. This should happen throughout the cycle of drafting the MPI standard, but should be concluded by this deadline. The deadline is up here, prior to 4 weeks before the start of the RCM. So that's just kind of re-emphasizing what chapter committees should be doing all the time in terms of making sure their chapters are accurate and consistent, and then giving a specific date when that should be concluded so that we can have a draft version of the standard to review and start ratifying. Any questions on that part? All right. So then further down, chapter committees no longer need to publish PDF versions of their chapters. The original point of that was that chapter committees could publish those PDFs, and then the document editor for the entire standard could compile those PDFs into one large PDF for the entire standard. That's no longer necessary with our current workflow, so that's been removed. And then similar down here, because the chapter committees don't need to publish their drafts, the requirements change and the dates change. So now instead of chapter committees needing to publish their drafts no later than 3 weeks before the RCM, only the document editor needs to publish the final draft of the entire standard. So again, just a simplification. So that is all related to the RCM, or the release candidate meeting. Then we get down to some rules for the final ratification meeting, and this is pretty much all simplification. Again, the chapter committee chairs don't need to publish new drafts of their standard, of their chapters for the standard, because we don't need them. And the document editor doesn't need to wait for that to occur because we don't need that either. So, so we've just removed those two pieces. And that is all for this pull request. Any questions or comments about any of this?
Any concerns or objections?
Okay. I will take silence as acceptance. I don't think that was particularly controversial to begin with, but we did have some good comments in the previous virtual meeting that that made that a little more ready to go. So I appreciate people that helped out then. So the second one is a little more substantial. So this is some procedures to have officer elections. I'm not going to read it off of this pull request, but I just wanted to show you where you can find it if you'd like to make comments. We have not previously actually had a specific procedure to elect the officers of the MPI Forum. We just kind of informally did that in the past. I was actually not around the last time we did that, so I don't really know what that looked like. But when we finished MPI 3.1, we did have a somewhat awkward, informal, should we just keep the officers we have? Yeah, that sounds fine, and we moved on. So we wanted to make that a little less awkward for everyone, give opportunity for anyone that would like to put their hat in the ring for any of the positions, and make it clear how that process should work, so that anybody that would like to participate can do so, and we can just validate that the way things are currently running, the people who are currently running the various parts of the forum should continue to do so. I think it's just good practice, even if we like the way things are going, to have a formal way to confirm that. So this pull request is essentially just adding the way we will do that. There is one additional change because one of the officer positions was underdefined. And so I'm going to switch over to a PDF to make this a little easier to read. All right. So one position we have had in the standard, or in the forum for a long time, is the meeting convener. This, at least for the MPI 4 cycle, has been Rich Graham, and the position seems to have changed a little bit from what it may have once been to what it currently actually entails. So at the moment, what Rich has largely been doing is helping manage the finances of the forum. Mellanox has been graciously taking care of our meeting registration and keeping track of the bank account and all of that sort of thing, and has been very helpful in that regard. So I wanted to update. Well, first I wanted to define the role because there was no definition for a meeting convener, and then I wanted to kind of update the definition to really reflect what that position actually means now. So rather than calling that position meeting convener, I'm proposing we call that position treasurer to make it more clear what's going on there. So the MPI Forum treasurer is responsible for managing the MPI Forum monetary resources and collecting and dispersing funds for the purposes of supporting the MPI Forum's activities. So again, this is largely the person who collects any money for meetings when we have physical meetings with registration fees, and we primarily use that money, almost exclusively use that money for paying for food when we have in-person meetings. Occasionally we do need to use a little bit of that for other things like paying for our domain name, but that's such a tiny fraction that we just use it from the leftover food money.
And so the just a background to that in the MPI 3.0 timeframe, Rich did post the chair and the treasurer because he could, and he managed this in a great way. The thing is, when I took over, I was part of the DOE, and if I would have been the treasurer, the money would have been DOE money, and that's why we started splitting it out at that point. So it was a convenience at that point, and Rich just agreed to just continue this, which was fantastic for us because we could still run it through Mellanox and have it in an account that was not controlled by DOE. That's the historic background for that, and that's just formalizing this role. And if someone is a forum treasurer, either we need to have a forum bank account or it needs to be from an organization where we can do this without being tied to any particular funding constraints.
Right, and one thing I brought up when we discussed this at the virtual meeting a couple of weeks ago is there are organizations that help groups like ours. One example is Software in the Public Interest. I believe the OpenMPI project uses them for this service. So if Rich wanted to step aside, or somebody else wanted to take that position, or we just wanted to move the money somewhere else, that would be one option. And they also provide some other services. I don't know that much about the other services they provide, but there seems to be some measure of legal assistance that they can help with, and perhaps some other things. So, we have options in the future if that's something that the treasurer wants to pursue. So this would be the person to be responsible for. Okay, any other questions on the treasurer role? All right, so then I'll start going through the actual procedure to elect our officers. So that would be all of, I guess, chapter 4 of the procedures. It seems kind of silly to call it a chapter, but here it is. So terms of office first. The officers of the MPI Forum serve for a full release cycle. This is defined as the time until an official version of the MPI standard is ratified. Officers for the next release cycle are elected at the final ratification meeting after the ratification of a new version of the MPI standard. So we did have a lot of discussion here, and we captured that in the rationale. This longer non-calendar limited term is intended to provide continuity across a full MPI standard document release series in order to preserve knowledge, reduce the overhead of transferring leadership roles from one person to another, and provide accountability for a full release of the MPI standard document. In its history, the MPI Forum has tended to keep officers through a full major release cycle rather than holding elections after every release. But during discussion, the Forum preferred to choose this cycle of electing officers after each release, even if the current set of officers is re-elected. So again, we discussed that during the virtual meeting. The original version of this document, I had proposed keeping officers for a full major cycle, but we decided it made sense to go ahead and hold that election, even if we all agree that we're going to keep the current set of officers, just to to give ourselves more flexibility in case we decide we want to make a change. So if an officer chooses to vacate their position before the end of their term, nominations open immediately upon announcement of the vacancy, and an election to fill the vacant position takes place at the next voting meeting. If an officer does not or cannot fulfill their elected role, the MPI Forum can conduct a ballot to remove an officer from their position. This ballot should be announced by a member of the MPI Forum in the same way as all other ballots, 2 weeks before a voting meeting via the existing announcement mechanisms, and will follow the same procedure as the ballot to elect new officers, and that is listed below. The vacated position will immediately open for nominations, and an election to fill the position will take place at the next voting meeting. If the position is vacated within 4 weeks of the next voting meeting, the election will take place at the following voting meeting to give candidates more time to be nominated. All right, questions on the terms?
No, I think it sounds fine.
Okay. All right, so now the procedures of actually holding that election. So the election procedure is as follows. At the release candidate meeting, a call is made for nominations for each of the officer positions of the MPI Forum. So that's chair, secretary, treasurer, and MPI standard document editor. Nominations can occur at any point prior to 2 weeks before the start of the FRM. Nominations should occur via a public mechanism similar to that which is used to announce document readings. So for example, public mailing lists. Nominees may nominate themselves, and nominees must be accepted by the nominated person to be valid. So rationale here, while any person can be an officer of the MPI Forum due to the weak membership requirements, it is recommended that nominees are active participants in the MPI Forum and are aware of the procedures and requirements of their offices. There are also no term limited preventing officers from continuing to serve if renominated and reelected. So in the event that Rule 5G in Section 2.2.4 is in effect at an RCM and the ratification is fast-tracked, so just as an aside, that is the rule that says if we are at a release candidate meeting and we don't have any other things that need to be changed in the document before ratification, we can go ahead and ratify the standard at that meeting instead of waiting for another one. So in the event that that rule is in effect and we fast track that meeting and therefore we don't have a separate FRM meeting, the election will be held at the next voting MPI Forum meeting. Nominations open immediately and remain open until 2 weeks before the start of that meeting. In the event that the ballot described in Rule 9D1 passes and an FRM needs to be repeated, so this is if we're at a final release candidate or final release meeting and we discover that there are problems with the standard that need to be addressed before we can repeat or before we can release it, and we therefore have to have that final release meeting again. So if we are going to add another one of those meetings, nominations reopen immediately and remain open until 2 weeks before the start of the next FRM. So that is unfortunately a little confusing just because we're jumping around a bit, but hopefully that provides enough context. So at the FRM, I Move organizations may vote for one candidate for each of the positions. This will occur via a special ballot conducted by the current MPI Forum secretary or an acceptable replacement if the secretary position is vacant. The options for the ballots will be the names of each of the candidates or abstain. A candidate is elected if A, the ballot meets the requirements for the individual ballot quorum, and B, the number of votes for a candidate is more than 1/2 of the valid non-abstain votes. We do still require quorum for each ballot, just like normal, but otherwise it's just majority. I'm sorry, plurality, not majority. No, other way around. Anyway. If no candidate reaches the threshold, the candidate with the lowest vote total is removed and the ballot is recast. As with other ballots, if a ballot fails to meet the required individual ballot quorum, the ballot can be recast one time at the same voting MPI Forum meeting. The ballot may also be deferred to a subsequent voting MPI Forum meeting, in which case the current officer should continue in their current role. So some rationale why we did it this way. While there are alternative voting mechanisms that could possibly determine a winner more efficiently, the system above was chosen for a combination of simplicity in the expected common case, where there are relatively few candidates and high consensus, and the ability to handle the most complex case with many candidates and an even split of votes. This also makes conducting the ballot relatively simple and similar to the existing voting systems used by the MPI Forum. And that is all of it. So any questions about any of that?
Good question, Wesley. This is Ryan. What happens if we have a tie?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
I guess I missed that. So I think the hope there is that that last thing about if we have more than 2 candidates, then we eliminate one. If we are down to 2 and we do literally have a tie, I didn't put a clause in there for that.
Can you have more than half and a tie?
No, I think that's the point, because if you have an even split and the split is a tie, you only have 2 candidates and there's a tie, then
Oh, okay. So which one do you drop?
Right.
From,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if you have a clear winner and the second, third are tied, then right, even then you have the issue.
Yeah.
With which one do you drop? Steel cage match? I don't know.
That'll be fun virtually.
If you have more than 2 candidates and you have a tie on like second and third, you could ask everybody to vote for just the second and third candidates to try to break the tie.
Yeah, that one is
2 candidates.
Well, you could just drop them
ties.
both.
I don't know what you do.
Drop them both. This is why rank preference is maybe a better choice in the edge case scenarios, but hopefully we'll never get into this edge case.
Yeah, I think we may also be just over specifying here, right? I mean, the way things typically run, the chance that we get something where we then afterwards can't talk about it and figure it out is very low, right?
I mean, I would expect that what we would do in that situation is have some discussion among us and then redo the ballot at some point, later in that meeting or the next meeting or something. And we would kind of figure out what we want to do at that point. Now, whether or not we want to specify that or specify something else, I don't know. Dan's right that ranked choice is probably the most generally good system for this, but I don't want to implement it. That's really mostly a lazy thing, because it is a pain to run a ranked choice vote.
Well, you can still end up with a tie, right?
Yes. If you only have 2 candidates, yes, you can still end up with a tie.
Which is actually not unlikely that we're going to have 2 candidates for one position.
Right, but only 2 as opposed to 3 or 3 or more. So my preference would be, if we get into this situation, we will just need to talk about it with the people that are there and figure out what we want to do. But if we want to add something here to specify exactly how that should work, I'm okay with that, but I don't know what it should be.
I think I second that statement.
I agree. I don't know how to resolve a tie, so I'll just deal with it if it comes up in the future. I highly doubt that it will.
We send it to Congress and they draw lots. Isn't that how it works eventually?
I would say we should not spend time on that, because it may happen in 10 years.
Yeah.
And the forum in 10 years should resolve it.
Leave it to the next generation. Great ideas.
Exactly. I'm seeing some good suggestions in the chat window, by the way, as well. I like drawing names out of a film roll, and there was another one to see who can build a fire the fastest.
Just wait long enough and one of them will retire.
That's also true. So So that'll work too.
The younger,
Okay.
That's actually a tie. The younger candidate wins.
Great.
Uh,
All right. So then I'll go ahead and consider this read. And if somebody has a good suggestion in the meantime, feel free to send me or everyone a note. But otherwise, I think we'll probably go ahead with this as it is.
And if you come up with a good tiebreaker later on that everybody likes, we can always add it. The rules are relatively easy to change.
Sure.
Okay. Any more comments, questions, concerns, objections? If not, we'll consider this read. We'll have the vote on those tomorrow at 9:30 Central Time. And then we go with that in the first technical topic. And we said we want to do semantics terms first to make sure we have enough time for this ticket, since there's a good chance for feedback still. And so, Puri, Rolf, who wants to read that?
I'm happy to do that.
Boy,
All right, Puri, you are the presenter.
Okay. All right, let me see the share screen. So before I do the formal reading, I want to do the, should I do the no vote first and then go to the reading?
Yes, I suppose. Well, we won't actually vote, but you can read
Right.
the no changes.
Okay, so since the 2-week deadline, we have made really one change, and let me see, this is the full screen is covering up my. Okay, so we have updated, we have made one major, not major, one minor change, and that is in the definition of non-local. And the changes are listed here. So the first box shows the changes, the version 2 weeks before the deadline, or the one that we sent out early on. And the change we would like to make to that now, since the 2-week deadline is shown here. Okay, so I will read out the one that we have changed. An MPI procedure is non-local if returning may require, comma, during its execution, comma, some specific semantically related MPI procedure to be called on another MPI process. Okay, and before, what it read was like this. So we believe that this is much clearer, and also this addresses the issues with mreceive and rsend. Okay, and again we have call out to say why we have used those particular words and phrases. And in fact, this will be helpful to kind of, this is an example that illustrates how we can use this definition to determine whether a particular MPI procedure is a local or a non-local procedure. So before I go into these, so this is the real change, okay? And this is one change that I've shown in the boxes. And again, what's added is a comma during execution, comma, and then the execution of has been removed, and then to be called is added. Okay, that's the change that we have done. Okay. And then because of that change, we made a couple of minor updates to the appendix table. So all those details are here on the second slide. In fact, this PowerPoint is also there on the issue. So we have removed 2 references to the RMA chapter in footnote 17 and 18. And there was nothing else in 18. So basically 18 is deleted, and one last sentence in footnote 17 is deleted. So that's it. That's the change that we have done since the 2-week deadline. Okay.
So, Puri, I have a quick question.
Sure.
back at the change where you say during its execution. What if I have like a strong progress network and a multi-threaded MPI that just suspends this stuff until the hardware completes it? Technically, I don't really require the other MPI process to be called during the execution of that thread. It's suspended. Does that mean it's local?
So again, we are only, so this, again, we can go with this example. So what we are talking about here in this particular case, an MPI procedure is non-local. So we are, for example, in this particular instance, that is MPIC. So we are saying, is MPIC a local procedure or a non-local procedure? Okay. So in this particular example, what we are saying is the call MPIC may depend on MPIB, and in turn, MPIB may depend on MPIA. But as far as MPIC is concerned, it really is non-local because it is local because it does not directly depend on MPIA. It's only dependent on MPIB. The fact that MPIB returned, that's sufficient for MPIC to continue. So of course there should be progress. We are assuming there is a separate progress happening, but MPIC does not have to wait on MPIA.
So
100%. Go ahead.
Just to clarify, Ryan, what you're asking is, I think the way I would answer what I think you're asking is that during its execution to us means between the point in time when you enter the function and the point in time when it returns, irrespective of whether it's actually scheduled on a particular hardware thread at any moment during that. All right, so I think you're thinking about during its execution, meaning as at a point when it is scheduled on a hardware thread, it's actually active. Whereas we're talking about an interval of time between the entry point and the exit point. The exit point will be delayed until this thing has happened somewhere else. That's what we might mean by during its execution. Does that clarify things?
Yes, I totally agree with both those things. The local or non-localness of MPIC should not depend on MPIA. I completely agree with that. What I was just pointing out was that execution there could mean two different things. I understand you mean it. That's what it means in this context. We haven't defined that anywhere, have we?
No, and I think
this is absolutely critical, but it might be something to add to the 4.1 ticket.
Yeah, we spent a long time trying to figure out this sentence and exactly what to say here. And you're right, that is still an ambiguity in the language that we decided to propose here. We haven't defined that during its execution means between the point in time when you call the function and the point in time when it returns, irrespective of whether it's scheduled or not during, at any particular given moment in. We could define that. I think we're starting to get, we're starting to, we certainly wouldn't want to do it here. We'd probably want to say what during execution means somewhere else and have it, otherwise this sentence becomes even more unwieldy than it already is. But that's an interesting clarification. The problem with using natural language.
And later on in the slide set for 4.1, we have also an additional way to test whether a routine is local or non-local. And this may be also one perfect additional clarification at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to add this already to 4.0.
So I wonder about the use of the word specific there.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a situation where you just need the remote process to invoke MPI progress.
Right, but it's not the user does not have to call an MPI function is what we wanted to say there. Specific semantically related MPI procedure.
Yeah, but that's a deliberate choice. Jim. But a local function is allowed to depend on progress remotely. That is still local, even if it depends on progress. It's only non-local if it depends on something specific, like a send depending on a receive, or a broadcast, an all reduced depending on an all reduced somewhere else. Yeah, clearly there's a lot of things that depend on progress remotely, and some of those things are local because that's the only thing they depend on.
I see.
It's weak local rather than strong local is the way we defined that in previous meetings, but yeah.
Okay, thanks.
May I also ask something? You use the term called here, to be called. And calling is for me something which is also in the assembly language, like I'm calling a function, and you call here an MPI procedure. So you have to call this MPI procedure during the execution of the other stuff. But wouldn't it be that this function already was called before and, as already said, is progressing? So the progress will trigger then the continuation here.
Yes, that's fine. That's covered by the word may. It's non-local if it may require this, right? In other words, if it hasn't happened by the time you enter this function, or the testing, is it non-local or not, then that function may require this other thing to happen during its execution before it returns, right? If it's already happened well before its execution, then it won't require it during its execution. It still requires it before it returns, but it could have happened. It's covered by the word may, which is the short answer.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks.
Yeah, we've been through this a long time.
These are good questions. These are the points that we've been discussing for a long time, and I think this sentence now does capture all of these subtleties. There are lots of nuances in this particular sentence, and these are all the points that we've been discussing. I think we could write several paragraphs to explain this, or stick with this sentence and some understanding of it.
Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay.
Or maybe having more examples would help clarify the sentence.
Yeah, that's all coming in 4.1. Because that would require a lot more changes. And Rolf has a presentation on what all we could consider for 4.1. And I have included that at the top of this ticket.
I think it's worth pointing out that there is an annex as part of the 4.0 changes. There is an annex that lists the local or non-localness of every single function apart from the RMA stuff.
Yes.
So we have lots of examples by just listing all of the functions and which they turn out to be. We don't necessarily say why for each one, but the result of that classification is known and listed in the annex.
Right, and there are footnotes when there are exceptions or special cases.
So this is just the reading of the changes of the announced.
Correct.
That's the no. I would suggest, since we're going to do the reading anyway, let's go so people know there has been a small change. You can point this out again when you read it.
Okay.
But let's do the reading of the ticket so everybody can see, particularly those who haven't been involved yet, can see the larger context, and perhaps things will become more clear this way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. All right. So should I then go ahead with the actual reading?
Yeah, please do so.
Okay. Let me switch. Okay. Hold on.
Do you first go through the slides for this reading?
Since we have been through that couple of times, do I need to go over the motivation for this? I'm assuming everybody is familiar about this particular ticket, why we are doing this and what we are doing here?
If you can cover it quickly, it may be
Okay.
good for some of the attendees,
All
which are new. I think it could help, but I wouldn't spend too much time on it, but I would run through that real quick.
Okay, all right, then let me get that.
And I wanted to make a comment just to level set a little bit, as we already talked about for one a couple times. You'll see the motivation for this ticket in just a second when Puri pulls it up. The intention of the ticket, though, is to be as constrained as possible without being inconsistent. Right? We want a correct standard, we want a consistent standard. We want something that's correct also going forward and doesn't have to be changed next time, but it doesn't have to cover all the nooks and crannies as long as we stay consistent, because otherwise there's no chance to get this ticket through ever. The idea is to get something in that's reasonable for 4.0, and then in 4.1 to go back and add additional clarifications, changes, or additions that we really see that we need. So don't expect us to be the ticket that finishes this discussion once and for all. We are looking for something that covers what we need, that what Puri is going to lay out, and we're looking for something that's correct and consistent also moving forward, right? But not necessarily complete.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I think that kind of, really captures the scope of what we're trying to do here. So just a quick, motivation for what we are trying to do here. So there are a couple of terms that are defined in the current standard, and I will show you what the current standard looks like first, and then we can go from there. So this is what the current semantic term section looks like. So it has the definition of these essentially 5 terms. Okay. However, since the 3.1 standard, we have added persistent. Okay, and the definition of persistent initially was there only in the point-to-point chapter. Now we also have collective persistent, and there was a comment or a concern when the persistent ticket was approved that, hey, persistent is never defined in the semantic term, so we need to add that. And we basically started this effort as trying to add the term persistent to the definition. Okay, and once we started that, what we found out was that the remaining terms, blocking, non-blocking, then persistent kind of fits that particular sequence, and we tried to add it there, but then we immediately noticed that persistent doesn't quite fit with the same definition of a blocking and a non-blocking procedure, because there is no persistent procedure, it's a persistent operation. And this led us to the discussion of, okay, we need to define what is an operation, what is an MPI operation that we are talking about. So that way we can then define persistent operation. So all this discussion to semantic terms started with adding persistent and persistent. We started by adding it as a persistent procedure, but then we said, okay, there is no persistent procedure. It's really a persistent operation. Then we need to define what is an operation. And of course, the operation is used in the standard some 1,000 times. So we thought, okay, let's go ahead and define that. And then this led us to these whole series of things. Okay, so again, this particular presentation is there. We have given this presentation at the virtual forum meeting several times, and this is also available with respect to this ticket. So if you're interested in this, I would recommend you to look at this presentation. Okay. And then the way we decided to go about defining an MPI operation is to essentially look at, hey, what are the, again, we started with the persistent operation. So basically the persistent operation, you can think of it as having 4 different procedures which could implement these persistent MPI operation. And then this leads us to a 4-state state transition diagram. And then we could, define non-blocking operation and blocking operation based on those state transition diagrams. So this is how we started introducing the notion of an operation and the various stages that are associated with an operation. And then we added corresponding operations as well. Okay, so essentially what we did was, we had these 5 definitions, and we needed to add the word operation. Of course, then we have to add the corresponding blocking, non-blocking operation, and then the persistent operation. So that's what we have done. Okay, and then there were issues with what the current definitions for each one of them. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I will just give you a snapshot at the end as to what we did. Okay, so this discussion we have had it several times, so I'm just going to go through this. I'm not going to go through this. Basically, we wanted to add operation, then corresponding persistent operation, and whatever currently exists in the semantic terms, they're either broken or unclear. So we thought it's time to fix it. So that's what we decided to do. And essentially what we decided was to break the semantic terms into two subsections, one for MPI operations and one for MPI procedures. And within the MPI operations, we defined the 4 stages, and then the 3 forms: blocking, non-blocking, and persistent, and then collective and non-collective operations. And then a parallel section, MPI procedures, where we define local and non-local procedures. Okay. Then how an MPI procedure is defined in terms of these operations, and then the properties associated with these operation-related procedures. Okay. So this is basically what we have added, and the structure of the subsections. And there was a subtitle missing for the next subsection, and we added a subtitle called MPI data types. In addition to that, we also added a table at the end in appendix to list all the various procedures, sort of chapter by chapter, and then capture the various properties associated with each of those procedures. Okay, and then again, here we did not want to change the definition of any MPI procedure, and we wanted to make these semantic terms as consistent as possible with the rest of the MPI standard. And this has been a more than a 2-year effort, or close to a 3-year effort, trying to get to this stage. Okay. All right. So with that, let me actually get to the real reading. Okay, and again, the annotated files, and if you like to follow it on the GitHub, I have again provided the link for that. So whatever works for you, feel free to follow that. You can of course just follow along with me. The best way to do that is to just open this particular file and look for or search for the issue number 96, or just number 96, and then it will take you there. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to search for 96 and then go from there. Okay. So the first change that we did was we added this particular statement at the end of the section 2.3. The words function, routine, procedure, procedure call, and call are often used as synonyms within this standard. Then section 2.4, semantic terms. When discussing MPI procedures, the following semantic terms are used. The term message data buffer refers to the send-receive buffer used in a communication procedure. The term file data buffer refers to the data buffers used by MPI I/O procedures. In this section, we use the term data buffer, and depending on the MPI procedure, it will refer to message data buffer or file data buffer. Okay. Then section 2.4.1, MPI operations. MPI operation. An MPI operation is a sequence of steps performed by the MPI library to establish and enable data transfer and or synchronization. It consists of 4 stages: initialization, starting, completion, and freeing. And it is implemented as a set of 1 or more MPI procedures. See section 2.4.2. So we define MPI procedures later on, so we just forward reference that. We don't want to get into the details here on that. Initialization hands over the argument list for the operation, but not the content of the data buffers, if any. The specification of an operation may state that array arguments must not be changed during the changed until the operation is free. Starting hands over the control of data buffers, if any, to the associated operation. Note that initiation refers to the combination of initialization and starting stages. Completion returns control of the content of the data buffers to the application and indicates that output data buffers and arguments, if any, have been updated. Note that an MPI operation is complete when the MPI procedure implementing the completion stage returns. Freeing returns control of the rest of the argument list, example, the data buffer, address, and array arguments. MPI operations are available in one or more of these forms: blocking, non-blocking, and persistent. So now we go ahead and define these three operations. Blocking operation. For a blocking operation, all four stages are combined in a single procedure call as shown in figure 2.1 and defined in section 2.4.2. So the state diagram for blocking operations. So basically there is a starting stage and an ending stage, and all the starting state and an ending state and all the stages are done within directly from one state to the other. Okay. Non-blocking operation. For a non-blocking operation, the initialization and starting stages are combined into a single non-blocking procedure call, and the completion and freeing stages are combined into a separate single procedure call, which can be blocking or non-blocking, as shown in figure 2.2 and defined in section 2.4.2. So here we have the starting state, then we have the initialization and starting function or procedure, which takes it to the active state, and then the completion and freeing function, which brings it to the final state. So state diagram for the non-blocking operation. Then the persistent operation. For a persistent operation, there is a separate procedure for each of the four stages, as shown in figure 2.3 and described in section 2.4.2. And each of these procedures may be blocking or non-blocking. So essentially we have four different procedures, and then depending on which state, which procedure you're calling, you go from one state to the other. Okay, so that's the state transition diagram for a persistent operation. Additionally, an MPI operation can be collective or non-collective. Collective operation. Collective operations are defined as operations that involve a group or groups of MPI process. For collective operations, the completion stage may or may not finish before all processes in the groups have started the operation. Okay. Collective MPI operations are also available as blocking, non-blocking, or persistent operations. Non-collective operation. Non-collective operations are defined as operations that are not collective. Okay. So that ends this section on MPI operations. So now we are looking at the subsection on MPI procedures. All MPI procedures can either be local or non-local, defined as follows. Non-local procedure. An MPI procedure is non-local if returning may require during its execution some specific semantically related MPI procedure to be called on another MPI process. And then again, the text which is highlighted in green is what we updated during the last 15 days. Okay, otherwise everything else remains the same. Local procedure. An MPI procedure is local if it is not non-local. Okay. And again, the rationale for why we are defining these, we have gone over that, and that's there in the slides. So if you're interested, you can look at that. An MPI operation is implemented as a set of one or more MPI procedures. An MPI operation-related procedure implements at least a part of a stage of an MPI operation as described in section 2.4.1. An MPI operation-related procedure may also implement one or more stages of one or several MPI operations. In certain cases, more than one MPI operation-related procedure may be needed to implement a single stage. There are also other MPI procedures that do not implement any stage of an MPI operation. Okay, so we do have MPI procedures which do not implement any stage of the operation. So that is just to clarify that. The semantics of MPI operation-related procedures are described using two orthogonal independent concepts: completeness, depending on which stages are included, and locality. Such procedures can be either incomplete or completing or freeing or completing and freeing based on the status of the associated operation at the time the procedure returns. Also, all such procedures can be described as either blocking or non-blocking, but these latter two terms refer to combinations of the completeness and locality concepts. Additionally, all MPI operation-related procedures can be collective or non-collective. The following are properties of MPI operation-related procedures. Initialization procedure. Okay, so now go ahead.
Puri?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I had a quick question. For the non-local procedure, like, can it be before or during, or is it only during?
So it is whatever the converse of non-local is, right?
No. I didn't say for local. I was looking at the definition of non-local. So currently it says an MPI procedure is non-local if returning may require during its execution. So can the remote process potentially do it also before it?
So I'm not sure I'm understanding your question here.
Yes,
So
is the answer.
okay, so Dan says yes is the answer.
Okay.
So maybe I will talk to you offline to figure out what your question is, but apparently Dan understood your question, so he says yes, so okay.
I think it's the same question Jim asked just before we got going with the reading.
Okay, so the you mean the scope, whether it is before or after?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I got it. Sorry. Okay, that was only, I guess, clarification you wanted, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Sorry, I forgot where I was. Okay, so the operation here, I was here at the properties of MPI operation related procedures. Okay. So for each of the stages, we have a procedure and then the corresponding procedure name. So initialization procedure. An MPI procedure is an initialization procedure if return from the procedure indicates that the associated operation has completed its initialization stage, which implies that the user has handed over control of the argument list, but not contents of the data buffers to MPI. The user is still allowed to read or modify the contents of the data buffers. If an initialization procedure is not also the freeing procedure of the associated operation, see below, since we are referring to the freeing procedure here, then the user is not permitted to deallocate the data buffers or to modify the array arguments. That's about the initialization procedure. Starting procedure. An MPI procedure is the starting procedure if return from the procedure indicates that the associated operation has completed its starting stage, which implies that the user has handed over control of the data buffers to MPI. If a starting procedure is not also a completing procedure of the associated operation, see below, then the user is not permitted to modify input data buffers or to read output data buffers. Okay, that's about the starting procedure. Initiation procedure. An MPI procedure is an initiation procedure if return from the procedure indicates that both the initialization and the starting stages have completed, which implies control of the entire argument list is handed over to MPI. Okay. Completing procedure. An MPI procedure is called completing if return from the procedure indicates that at least one associated operation has finished its completion stage, which implies that the user can rely on the content of the output data buffers and modify the content of input and output data buffers of such operations. If a completing procedure is not also a freeing procedure, see below, then the user is not permitted to deallocate the data buffers or to modify the array arguments. Incomplete procedure. An MPI procedure is called incomplete if it is not a completing procedure. Freeing procedure. An MPI procedure is freeing if return from the procedure indicates that at least one associated operation has finished its freeing stage, which implies that the user can reuse all parameters specified when initializing such associated operations. Okay. Non-blocking procedure. An MPI procedure is non-blocking if it is incomplete and local. Blocking procedure. An MPI procedure is blocking if it is not non-blocking. advice to users. Note that for operation-related procedure, in most cases, incomplete procedures are local and completing procedures are non-local. Exceptions are noted where such procedures are defined. In many cases, an additional prefixed letter I as the abbreviation of the words incomplete and immediate marks non-blocking procedures in the procedure name. Some categorization examples are listed below. Non-blocking procedures that are incomplete and local, all the non-blocking, typical non-blocking ones like MPI iSend, iReceive, IBcast, IMprobe, iSendInit, iReceiveInit. Then the blocking procedures, among blocking procedures, again, basically we have four quadrants, and the non-blocking fall into one quadrant and the blocking into other three. And then the ones which are completing and non-local, MPI send, MPI receive, MPI broadcast. Incomplete and non-local, MPI mprobe, MPI broadcast init, MPI file-based split file. I guess these are split file-based operations with the corresponding begins. And then the completing and local are the bsend, rreceive, rsend, and mreceive. Okay. MPI procedures are not operation related. So again, examples of those which are not operation related, things like comrank, wtime, probe, iprobe, etc. Again, wherever we have dot, that means it's not a complete list, it's an incomplete list. So these are just some examples in terms of how we can categorize this. Okay. End of advice to users. Then we have the collective procedure, NMP procedure.
Peter, we have a question on the chat from Catherine.
Okay, all right, let me see.
So she is asking if synchronous send, our definition is local or non-local. So just to clarify, synchronous send is non-local.
Yes.
In the definition, ready send is local.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry, I have some background noise, so hopefully it's not too distracting. So on the synchronous send, the receiver can post the receive, I think, before the send is executed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so if that's non-local, does that fit your definition?
Yeah, because of the may.
The may. Okay, yeah. I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Could you say again? You made a comment with respect to ready send.
Mm-hmm.
Can you assign the labels to that one for me again?
Yeah. So it's right here.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Local.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to noodle on that.
Mm-hmm. So the earlier example that we provided, because ready send is dependent on the receive being posted on the other side. So during its execution, it doesn't need to call anything because it's already posted. If it's not, then it's an erroneous program.
Right.
Yeah. Same thing with the mreceive.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't see the chat window while I was reading. Thanks, Julian, for pointing that out. Okay. So collective procedures. Collective procedure. An MPI procedure is collective if all processes in a group or groups of MPI processes need to invoke the procedure. Initialization procedures of collective operations over the same process group must be executed in the same order by all members of the process group. An MPI collective procedure is synchronizing if it will only return once all processes in the associated group or groups of MPI processes have called the appropriate matching MPI procedure. The initiation procedures for non-blocking collective operations and starting procedures for persistent collective operations are local and shall not be synchronizing. All other procedures for collective operations, such as blocking collective operation and the initialization procedures for persistent collective operations may or may not be synchronizing. advice to users. Calling any synchronizing function is erroneous when there is no possibility of corresponding calls at all other processes in the associated process group. Waiting for completion of any collective operation is erroneous when there is no possibility that all other processes in the associated group will be able to start the corresponding operation. End of advice to users. Annex A.2 summarizes the semantics of all operation-related MPI procedures. And then we added the subheading, MPI subsection 2.4.3 MPI data types. For data types, the following terms are defined. So that particular subsection title and the corresponding line wasn't there. The predefined just started immediately after collective. Okay, all right. So this is the big change in the section 2.4 in the semantic term section. And then wherever we have exceptions, we have comments added. So I'm going to go over that next. But before I go over to that section, I wanted to pause here and see if there are any questions.
I had what is, I think, is maybe a minor thing that we could think about for 4.1 on the definition of non-collective. Just because of the way that it's kind of framed. So collective operations involve groups of MPI processes. I could see how a reader might assume that sort of encompasses any communication operation that involves two processes, for example. And it may be helpful in non-collective operations to specify that they can involve specific MPI processes, but not entire groups, if that makes sense. I'm not sure of the wording, but there's just a little bit of a...
So again, we really try to, come up with what is non-collective, and the easiest thing we could do, and probably the best thing we could do, was to say, hey, whatever is not collective. Otherwise, you have to really say, other than give examples, there's really no way to do a definition.
Well, so, okay, so a different way to kind of achieve the same thing would be to say that collective operations are defined as operations that involve one or more MPI groups of MPI processes. I guess what kind of is getting me is it doesn't say MPI in front of group. Maybe this is just a nitpick.
I think that's a good point, because a group without the MPI qualifier on the front, well, a single process is nominally part of a group. If you refer to maths and what sets are and so on, then a set can be empty. It can have one thing in it. It can have more than one thing in it. So all operations are either collective or not collective. Depending on how you interpret that, we really do mean MPI group.
Yeah, it's a group or groups of MPI processes. So the way I read it is a group of MPI processes or a groups of MPI processes, right?
Yeah, but I think we do mean MPI group.
Right, I'm thinking specifically we would want to say that it's the MPI group object.
Yeah, I think possibly by proxy through a communicator. So, we need to be a bit careful. Just it's not always an MPI group directly, but it might be by proxy via a communicator or a window or a file. Those are effectively still an MPI group, but it's the group behind, associated with the communicator window file. But it isn't just a random group, a collection, an ordered collection of processes like in some array that I made up, because that could be, that's clearly going to get the wrong answer.
So I can't remember the actual routine anymore, but somehow in the back of my head, I have the notion there's at least one or two cases in the standard where it's not necessary an MPI group, where there is actually a group of processes that is semantically related to the routine that do something together. And I don't know anymore where I have this from, but it's in the back of my head. So I'm not sure specifying the group here could be a
It
little
is
bit.
such a procedure.
I can at least say we have three ways. It can be a normal communicator. It can be an intercommunicator, which combines two groups of MPI processes. And it can be also at the end a group of processes that's in the MPI ComCreate group or ComCreate groups routine, which is collective only over the group and not over the communicator. These are the three major cases. And then there's a fourth case, and that is MPI finalize is collective over all processes that are connected, and there need not to be a communicator specified for that.
Martin, are you thinking of process sets from sessions?
No, it was before sessions. I think it was somewhere deep in the whole spawn ticket and the spawn issue. But I don't really remember the details and we'll really have to look back.
Oh, you mean with the connect?
Mm-hmm. I think there's one or two routines where you really have to have a couple processes active at the same time that do something together. And only then the whole thing completes. It's not an MPI group in that thing, but I really would have to dig in and find this again.
I don't think there's a collective though. Things like connect accept, you do need a connect matches in some way with accept and vice versa, but they aren't collective in the same way as send and receive aren't collective. You know, there is an associated specific semantically related MPI procedure, but there isn't a collective thing there. I mean, partly collective is it's the same procedure called on multiple processes, and I think we do actually mean by collective we do actually mean it's the same procedure, and you specify which other ones are going to be involved through a group or some other object that hides a group.
Could well be.
But here we are at the operation, collective operation, and the routines are coming. There's a second section about collective procedures. Maybe we continue with the discussion if needed.
For now, I would just, since we are very close, I would just caution against over-specifying it here.
Yeah.
And if we're unsure, rather leave it vague so we can fix it later instead of doing something wrong now.
Right, but I think I will note down Jim's point that he wanted to really say it's an MPI group or group.
Well,
MPI.
yeah. Now, with all these examples, now I'm not sure that this is a very good suggestion anymore.
Yeah.
I think, Mike, I just looking at these two, if I think about a point-to-point operation, I just, I think we know where it should go, but I just, it's not. I think you could kind of make an argument that it goes in either one of these. But again, I don't think there's any reason. I don't have any concern about proceeding with this text and then maybe seeing if we can come up with a clever way to draw the distinction at some point in the future.
Okay, all right. We will definitely talk about that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the discussion.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Am I going backwards or forwards? Oh, sorry, because it stopped there. Okay. All right. So I stopped here. Now I'm going to go look at the other sections where we have updated the document. Okay. So one of those sections is here. So this is the text that we have added. According to the definitions of section 2.4.2, MPI BSend is a completing procedure, and the user can reuse all resources given as arguments, including the message data buffer. It is also a local procedure because it returns immediately without depending on the execution of any MPI process in any other, I will read it again. It is also a local procedure because it returns immediately without depending on the execution of any MPI procedure in any other MPI process. Advice to users, this is one of the exceptions in which a completing and therefore blocking operation related procedure is local. Okay, at end of advice to users. So this is in the section on bsend. Okay. And then we updated this section. Okay, so again, there were some comments that, we need to update this section. So for the functions defined in this section, we use the same naming conventions as for blocking communication. A prefix of B, S or R is used for buffered, synchronous, or ready mode. In addition, for these functions, a prefix of I for immediate and incomplete indicates that the call is non-blocking. Okay, so we have really added this, and then this particular text at the top was just for clarification since we are updating this section. Pawan suggested that we do that, and we have done that. Okay, so here it's not highlighted, but in the Git you will see that this was also added, and this was also added. Okay. So on the request free, now that we also have request free used by the persistent collective operations, so we wanted to clarify that. So again, we didn't add the whole section. We only updated a couple of parts of it, but it's easier to read the whole thing. MPI request free is a local operation. By the way, that existed before, we didn't change it. Classes of operation described later in the standard, such as non-blocking collective and persistent collective, also use request objects. So this we added. In the case of non-blocking operations or active persistent requests, this routine marks the request object for completion and freeing. Ongoing communication, if any, that is associated with the request will be allowed to continue until it is finished. The request will be completed and freed only after its associated communication is finished. In the case of inactive persistent request, it frees the operation, which implies that the user is allowed to reuse all parameters specified in the initialization of the persistent request. The use of this routine for generalized request is described in section 12.2. In all these cases, the request is set to MPI request null. In the case of non-blocking collective operations and in the case of persistent collective operations with an active request handle, it is erroneous to call MPI request free. So basically what we have done here is, when the original request free was written, it was just written with a point-to-point. Now that we have added non-blocking collectives and persistent collectives, we wanted to reflect that there is some reference to this with respect to those chapters, and we have forward referenced those chapters. Okay.
Isn't there kind of a contradiction between the mention of active persistent requests on line 17 in the last sentence? So I think the last sentence says that it's erroneous to call with an active persistent request handle, and the sentence on line 17 says that it marks the request object for completion and freeing.
I'm trying to read through that. Okay, this one.
I think the latter sentence includes the word collective and the first one does not. That's the significant difference.
If you have an active persistent receive operation, you're allowed to call free on it.
So if I did send init, start, and then request free, that's allowed.
Yep.
It's a terrible thing to do, but it's allowed.
Is that really allowed?
Yes.
Wow.
This is why it was specifically excluded when non-blocking collectives were introduced and when persistent collectives were introduced and we had both precedents. We chose the non-blocking collectives one because that's, with a collective, if you could do all reduce init, then start, then request free. No, don't do that. Please don't do that. Right. So we'd love to go back and fix the point-to-point case but that would be backwards compatible and
Yeah.
a nightmare and so on. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the significant
Well,
difference between.
So I guess then would it be helpful to add non-collective on line 17 to just distinguish these two as being non-overlapping cases?
That might be a really good change, and it might also be a good idea to move these two sentences close to each other to draw out that contrast rather than just making it look like it's an accident. I guess that's a 4-1 clarification. I don't really want to do that now, but yeah, we could do.
Well, or we may have time to add errata before we're finished, or chapter committee, right? These are not big changes.
Yeah, I mean, chapter committee stuff we can do anytime. If it's non-controversial and everybody thinks that that's fine, then you know, I mean, that is what it means. It can't mean anything else, because the other cases, the collective case is called out in 24, 25. So it's not like it's changing anything. It's
Right.
effectively non, you know, it's not changing any semantics. It's just making it clearer. So yeah, we could do it chapter committee if you want.
Right. So should it be non-collective or should it be just, you know, point to point?
Oh boy, I mean, it seems like you've put all this work into defining non-collective. It'd be a shame not to
Yeah, I
use
think we
that
should use
here.
the collective, because what about RMA? What about
Yeah.
file? You know, the individual file, the non-collective file operations, and so on. It's not just point to point.
Okay.
But, we would want to say non-collective. I just maybe mean this with your note already, but just non-collective, both for non-blocking and the active persistent case afterward
Yeah. And
in the same sentence. Yep.
so probably what you're saying is, should we move this higher or should we bring that lower?
Yes.
Yes, you guys are the experts. I'll let you. But yeah, I think that also, since those are kind of touching on the same concepts, having them be neighboring sentences would be helpful.
Okay, so for now I've written that move this closer to line 17, 18.
Question if you really want to do this as a chapter committee change, because this is subtle.
Right.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Another quick fix could be just to say in front of the in this case said unless otherwise specified in this case of non-blocking. Is the option open for the sentence below to override it?
It's not overriding it though.
Separate, yeah.
It is actually calling out the disjoint case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the right fix is to put non-collective in.
Yeah, I think before we get carried away, I think if you just add non-collective in the sentence where he has the first comment, then I think it's completely resolved. It's just the the other suggestion would just have been to make the paragraph a little bit easier to read, but I don't think. If that's too much for us to try and squeeze in, I don't have an issue with letting it be just where it is.
But definitely, I think the chapter committee can look at this in terms of at least rearranging the sentences so that they are next to each other, since they are going on the same thought or idea.
Hey, Puri, maybe the chapter committee could also talk about putting in an exception for this statement is only true on Tuesdays. I think that would make it a lot more clear.
All right, I'm moving along. Are there any more questions on this?
Yeah, Wednesdays? What about?
Again,
Maybe only days that end in Y.
Yeah, in which country though?
We don't mention the color of the box it's in either.
Before we carry it away here, I really think this needs to be looked at more than the chapter committee does. That's a cross-cut. We have non-blocking collectives in more than just one chapter.
No, so what I mean is, we're not actually changing. This statement is true. So there is really, no concern about that. It's just that this and this are talking about, two different cases. So this was, my guess is this is what existed before, and this is what's added now, right?
So actually that's not true, because in RMA at page 481, line 25, it's explicitly to call MPI requests free on any request related to RMA operations. So that's non-collective.
Okay.
That's a good point. That's a good catch.
11.3.5, the 10th line in that text.
And tell me the page number again, George.
I'm not sure what copy I have, so look at 11.3.5 about
Okay.
the second to last line from the second paragraph.
You're talking about our put, our get, and our accumulate, and so on. Those ones that have requests. So yeah, that's a good catch.
No. Up. In the beginning of the there, second paragraph. It's
Okay.
line 13 for you.
Explicitly call out that we don't that we haven't covered fully the RMA chapter, but it would be bad to put in something that was actually wrong like that. So we should fix that.
Okay. All right. So let me...
It's almost like you'd just be better off saying which requests you can free before they're completed. I don't know. It's such a horrible thing to do, right? I mean, because it puts the application in a position where they basically just they're not able to use any buffers that were involved in that operation because you can never find out when it's been completed.
Yeah, in fact, there is text to that effect in the standard saying, don't do this because, and you get into the situation where you can't reuse the buffers and you don't know anything about when it finishes and so on. It tells you why it's a bad idea, but it allows it.
Yeah. We may add to this yellow part also the RMA handles.
Oh, you mean here in the second part?
Yes, in this yellow area that we also add RMA. Yeah. And then we put it above. This means you start with those cases where it's not allowed, and then the cases are coming where it's allowed to use.
We have this thing where we we create these lists, but then they get out of sync. I'm wondering if just a more general statement that says that there are, like the sentence on line 17 just says that there are exceptions that are noted for the relevant operations, or something like that. Look out for exceptions to this rule.
Yeah, we could. What you mean is state the thing on 2425 as the general rule of you're not allowed to do this, and then put except where it's noted for particular operations.
Well, so the non-blocking collectives and persistent collectives are new enough that hopefully we didn't screw up those semantics. But I was thinking of and maybe we needed the exception there too. I was thinking of the sentence that goes from line 17 to 18. In the case of the non-blocking, non-collective operations or non-collective active persistent requests, this routine, I don't know, marks the request object for completion and freeing unless it's erroneous to do so.
Yeah, I think this shows up. We need to think about this a bit more. Probably not in this meeting.
Yeah, I just get concerned about I mean, it's hard for us to be future proof and comprehensive in coming up with a list like that if we wanted to list out the exceptions here.
Right.
Because it's almost like what's stated in the sentence here is the exception. This isn't a semantic that we would that we would introduce in a new operation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I suggested that we start with the sentence on 2425, that's the general case, right? We want to say don't free an active request, any active request, right? And then, but actually there's a couple of cases where you are explicitly allowed to do that. You probably shouldn't be, and don't use it, but there are a couple of cases and line 17 is the exception. That there are a couple of cases where you're allowed to do this. If you're for those cases, this is what it'll do.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be fine too.
Right. So maybe switch the order of them.
Order,
And
yeah.
we need to work on the wording and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this part of this ticket or is this a separate ticket? Because that text was there before, right?
Yeah, this part of the text I believe was there before, and I can double check that. This is request free. Okay.
I think we're talking about 4.1 because I think this is going to need another. Whilst it was just a chapter committee change, that was fine to do. After that, we could vote on this and not bother the forum again. If we're actually going to change wording and try and capture more cases, and the stuff in RMA that's the thing that we need to capture, then I think this is at least an errata change. It needs a vote. So we're probably looking at 4.1 now just from timeline.
That's kind of what I'm thinking too. So
should we leave it as it is exactly then for 4.0 and then fix it in 4.1, or what do we do?
I mean, this is a bug that has been there before, right? This is when there's an inconsistency. It has been there before in MPI 3.0 and 3.1 already.
Well, the first sentence yes, the second sentence no.
Let's make it simple. We still can do an errata to that or a no vote before we are doing the next or last vote to this ticket. It means we will provide this correction until the next meeting. But we can now proceed with reading and voting and all. That's my problem. Don't do it.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me.
Yeah. And thanks to George for pointing out the RMA part because we had looked into that. I have not looked into that. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I have noted down that, and we will definitely come back to that. Okay. So then the next change again the comments where we have noted exceptions. iProbe. MPI iProbe is a local procedure since its return does not depend on MPI calls in other MPI processes, which is marked with the prefix I for immediate. Okay. And then we, I believe, added this non-local call here. MPI probe behaves like MPI iProbe, except that it is a non-local call that returns only after a matching message has been found. And here there was a, was there local or non-local?
I think this is the word blocking was there.
Blocking, sorry. Yeah.
It said this is a blocking call that, and it means a non-local call.
Yeah.
And then I think in the example it was also
use blocking probe. Yeah. Yeah.
And we just removed blocking.
Yeah. Okay. Just to keep the nomenclature clean. Okay. And then IMProbe. MPI IMProbe is a local procedure according to the definitions of section 2.4.2, and in contrast to MPI iProbe, it is a non-blocking procedure because it is the initialization of a match receive operation. Okay. And similarly, according to the definitions of section 2.4.2, MPI mProbe is incomplete. It is also a non-local procedure. Advice to user, this is one of the exceptions in which incomplete procedures are non-local. So just pointing out cases. Okay. This is now in the collective communication chapter. According to the definitions in section 2.4.2, the persistent collective initialization procedures are incomplete. They are also non-local procedures because they may or may not return before they are called in all MPI processes of the process group associated with the specified communicator. Advice to users, this is one of the exceptions in which incomplete procedures are non-local and therefore blocking. Okay. And by the way, this is in the persistent operation, persistent collective section, just in case you're wondering where this is. Okay. This is in the info chapter, I believe. Yeah, info object. So here it said non-blocking. We have replaced that with any MPI routine and also added in-out, I believe. When info is used as an in or in-out argument to any MPI routine, it is parsed before that routine returns so that it may be read, modified, or freed immediately after return. Because now the reason for this is we use info arguments with persistent collective operations. So early on, it was only for a specific subset of those operations. So we basically said any. Okay, and since you can read, we had to do in or in out. Okay. And this is in the RMA chapter. The use of the terms such as blocking, such as non-blocking and local in this chapter follow the usage in MPI 3.1, and this chapter has not been updated to follow the definitions in section 2.4. The MPI forum intends to update this chapter in a subsequent version of the MPI standard to follow the definitions in section 2.4. So again, this, we discussed in the last virtual meeting. We haven't gone through every function or every line in this chapter to make sure that the use of the word local, non-local, blocking, non-blocking are consistent with the definitions in the semantic terms. So that's just a disclaimer that this has not been updated. Okay, this is in the IO chapter. According to the definitions in section 2.4.2, the begin procedures are incomplete. They are also non-local procedures because they may or may not return before they are called in all MPI processes in the process group. Advised to users, this is one of the exceptions in which incomplete procedures are non-local and therefore blocking. So this is, I believe, the split collectives we're talking about here. Okay. And now we have the table. So we have the summary of the semantics of all the operation related procedures. So before I get started with that, any questions? Okay, if not, I will just go through this. So this section, so again, this entire section is new, this 8.2. This section provides the list of MPI procedures that are associated with an MPI operation or inquiry procedures providing information about an operation. So the table legend, it has the stages, various stages listed, I for initialization, S for starting, C for completion, and F for freeing. Then the completion or freeing, so CPL for completion, IC for incomplete, C for complete, F for freeing procedure, local or non-local, L for local, and L for non-local. And then whenever there are exceptions, we have used bold red. For example, incomplete plus non-local, complete plus local, both are defined as blocking. So whenever we have such situations, we have them in red. Then of course, blocking with B and non-blocking with NB. Okay, and then again, this is just for the user's point of view. And this is just a hint to the user. Okay, and then we have bold green, and these are for exceptions, non-blocking procedures without the prefix I, or that the prefix I only marks immediate, because it could be both incomplete and immediate, but when cases where it's just immediate, we have marked them as well. Then what is the operation that it corresponds to the particular procedure? Whether it's a blocking operation or a non-blocking operation or a persistent operation, B for blocking, NB op for blocking operation, NB op for non-blocking operation, and P op for persistent operation. And then for the collective procedures, So we say C for collective or all processes in the group. All processes in the group must call the procedure. SQ denotes that they must be in the same sequence. So that means the ordering needs to be the same. S1 stands for blocking synchronization, i.e. no process shall return from this procedure until all processes in the associated process group call this procedure. W1, the implementation is permitted to do blocking synchronization, but not required to do blocking synchronization. Okay, it is not required, but may. That's what it's saying. Start complete synchronization. No process shall complete the associated operation until all processes on the associated process group have called the associated starting procedure. W2, the implementation is permitted to do S2, but not required to do S2. Okay. Then we also have a notes or a comments table where we indicate which resources are blocked. And we have that column called block resources. They are blocked after the call until the end of the subsequent stage. I think that error, that's extra. Where this resource is not mentioned further. Okay, so I need to get rid of that D there. And then we have footnotes for in the column, depending on the specific operation. Okay, so instead of reading all the footnotes here, I will go to the table and then come back to these footnotes as appropriate. Okay, so again, this shows the changes that we have done since the 2-week version. So there was footnote 18, we have removed that, and then there was a reference to RMA chapter at the end of footnote 17, we have removed that. And then the numbers 18 and 19 got moved up. Okay. All right. So here is the table. So we have the name of the procedure. Then we have the column which indicates which stages are being completed by that particular procedure. Then whether it is a completing or freeing procedure, whether it's low blocking or non-blocking procedure, whether it's a local or non-local procedure, then whether it's a blocking or non-blocking procedure, and then the corresponding operation. Is it a blocking operation, non-blocking operation, or a persistent operation? And then for collective, we have whether it is a collective or not. If it is C, it's collective. Then whether the sequence of is required, and then whether it is synchronizing or not synchronizing. Okay, so, and then the last column is the blocked resources and other comments or footnotes as to what we want the user to look at these specific things. Okay. All right. So do I really need to go over each one of these functions and say what they are, or how do I go about this, Martin?
I mean, just more question for the larger group. What's the best way? Do people want to go over this individually? Is it okay to read this on your own? Are we considering things read if we just go with this? I mean, it's really up to what people want to hear. I mean, I've seen the table and went over it, so I personally am okay with that. But people want to discuss every single routine? Or people are
I
okay?
motion that you give the group 30 seconds to voice any questions, and if there are none, move on.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay, the clock starts now.
I don't say that glibly. I mean that, you know, people should have reviewed this before this morning.
I think we can move on.
Okay.
I mean, are there any particular questions about the particular lines that people have seen in their review? Let me ask this way then. Okay, I guess that's your answer.
Okay, all right. Then the next change after this table is, okay, so the second part of the table, that's all the collective and file operations. And then the change log. So this is the change log associated with this change. Okay, section, you know, all these sections and annex on pages, these are the ones that are updated. The semantic terms were updated, and the new Annex A.2 summarizes the semantics of all MPI procedures that are associated with an MPI operation. The definition of the MPI semantic term non-blocking in particular has been clarified. The de jure meaning before MPI 4.0 was equivalent to the MPI 4.0 meaning of the MPI semantic term incomplete. However, the de facto usage of the term non-blocking when applied to the MPI procedure calls has always been the combination of incomplete and local. Consequently, the definition of the MPI semantic term blocking has been clarified to be completing and or freeing and or non-local. That should have just said that it was the opposite of non-blocking, but probably that needs to be fixed.
I think in line with Bill's comments on some of these things, we could definitely do with shortening this.
Okay.
We don't need to re-explain the changes.
Yeah, so I will continue to read this, and probably this may be a big change log. We could probably shorten this. The definition of the local procedure was also clarified. Before MPI 4.0, the local procedure was de jure defined through a strong local definition, whereas de facto a weak local definition is often implemented. Example for MPI cancel. Therefore, in MPI 4.0, the definition of being local was relaxed. The definition of the collective procedure was also clarified. Before MPI 4.4, the initiation procedures of non-blocking collective operations were de jure not collective because they are local and not synchronizing, but the definition of a collective procedure included synchronizing. Those procedures fulfill all other criteria for being collectives. In MPI 4.0, the requirements for being collective was relaxed for these procedures that they are now also de jure collective. I think Dan's comment that this is a lengthy changelog, maybe this could be shortened to reflect that these were the places that were changed and the user can actually go look at what the changes were. Okay. So that's the changes. Then everything else is automatically generated, like the table of contents and index and things like that. Okay. So that's the end of my reading.
So are there any, I mean, this is a large ticket that has a lot of global impact. Are there any questions, concerns, things we need to discuss still? Or are people okay with this change going forward? Is that there was a couple things that will be addressed in 4.1 and the group is committed to continue working on that. But people feel this is consistent for now and ready to go into 4.0. Are there any doubts left? So I don't know how to do a
So
straw
I have
poll.
a meta question.
Go ahead.
Sure.
This is Catherine about the large table. Just to be clear, I don't object to the large table. I just worry in terms of the future, trying to keep it consistent and correct.
Okay. So
I think it's great. It's a great resource, right? Like in terms of making sure these definitions match every single MPI routine. I feel like this was a necessary thing to do. I just don't know how useful it would be in the standard, but again, I'm not objecting to it. I'm sure you guys have thought this through.
Yeah. So let me offer a couple of comments, and then I will let others members of the semantic terms working group chime in. So Rolf did this by hand. So he did this, by looking at every function, and he went through the manual effort to do this. So one of the goals that we have with the new Pythonization effort that we went through is to be able to generate this table automatically based on annotation for each of the MPI functions. So that way, if somebody wants to, see which functions are local and which functions are non-local, they could just kind of, generate it on the fly if they want to. So that's kind of the goal that we have. So for now, obviously this is pretty painful to do this, and obviously Rolf did this, and now anybody who adds new function, they need to kind of think about where their APIs fit in. But we do have a plan to automate that, and I will let others from the working group comment on this.
But whether we will really automate it, I would add the comment that this table always tries to put together those routines that belong to one operation, that initialize, that start, that complete, and that finalize this operation. And this is, of course, then absolute manual putting things together, and that's also the additional major work that is in this table to show what fits together. And for example, an corresponding MPI weight acts different for a non-blocking call or non-blocking request handle and for a persistent request handle, because in one case, in the first case, it completes and finalizes. In the other case, it only completes the operation. And of course, in Fortran 1, we will add additional sections to this table. For example, RMA. We have not yet done RMA. In Fortran 1, RMA will come also to this table. And also we will look at additional areas in the MPI center that are not handled at the moment, like partitioned communication, for example.
Yeah, I think I would emphasize the point made by Puri there about the Pythonization stuff. There are grand plans coming off the back of the Pythonization stuff to make a lot of at least the API stuff in MPI machine readable. And at the point where MPI understands, or a tool can read the standard and gain enough knowledge about how MPI works to be able to generate this table automatically. You can also do things like generate MPI.h automatically, and you can also do correctness checking in a way that you can't do at the moment, and a bunch of other things. So this is a great first step in a quite a long road of possible ideas. And yeah, you're right to point out that there's some manual effort in this table at the moment, but we are looking towards to trying to automate this, and even things like what Rolf mentioned there of trying to group these things together in the order of the stages for an operation and so on. If we can get to the point where we can make that a machine readable property in the definition of each of the APIs, then we can generate this table exactly like this in future, some future version, and that will be very helpful for all sorts of other things.
So that sounds good. I guess the question I have is, if we decide to reformat this table based on automatic generation, I think it's not a deprecation change, right? It would be, how hard would it be to change this table in the future? Even if it's just formatting or grouping or...
Do you mean procedurally as in voting in the MPI forum or coding wise?
No, pretend it's magic and the coding is easy, procedurally wise.
I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a question for Martin and others currently.
Catherine, as long as the information that is here in the table is kept in the same correct way as it's in the moment in the table, there's no problem. No? That's the same what we did here with the Pythonization. We controlled that the existing information is kept by the automatization process. And as long as the information is not corrupted, all is fine. This means the first stage would be that the information that is here in the table is controlled with the information that we have in the Pythonization tables. And if there is a conflict, that at least the conflict is shown up and reported.
Well, I think it's not so much the conflict between what's in the table and what's in the Python bindings. It's more like what's in the rest of the text, right? I mean, we now writing something down here, which may also be written in some English text somewhere, right? And that consistency is certainly a concern now that we're stating it explicitly here. I still think, I personally still think it's worth it, but I think it's a valid concern that we can run into inconsistencies, not between the auto-generated stuff, but between the auto-generated stuff and the English that we have in the text. We probably have to make sure we pull this out of the English text as much as possible in future versions, so we don't only have it in one location again.
Yes, but also if you auto-generated the information from which it's auto-generated, it should be close to the English text, right? Because the API definition is close to where the API definition is discussed.
I mean, physically close.
Yes.
Yeah, that's certainly that's right. Yeah.
No. But that's also forward 1 and later.
Yeah, by the time we get to MPI 10,
the
the Python. Oh, go on.
Oh, sorry, Dan. I think the point should be that when this becomes auto-generated, the format is almost certainly going to change, because it is just a rule of maintenance over time that if something was human-generated and then changed to be auto-generated, it's going to be even ever so slightly different. So I think Catherine's question is a good one, because it's more a procedural question than, you know, the reality of converting this to be an automated process, which, by the way, I would like to super strengthen what Dan and Puri said. It is absolutely necessary that this turns into an auto-generated thing, because otherwise I guarantee it will either become very stale in horrible ways or subtle ways or both. And or it will generate ginormous amounts of time by humans to review that it is still correct.
Yeah.
So I mean, the table as it is right now is very terrible for auto generation, right? Because all these summaries are basically manually done right now. So if you want to automate this, which I'm all for, and I completely agree with what you just said, the format of the table probably has to change.
Yes, it will. When it is auto-generated, it is going to change, because, you know, you won't be able to squeeze in all this information like this in so compactly. So maybe, you know, one way I view that is, you know, we will, just like we have list of functions, we'll have each function and then, you know, have a description in terms of what stages it accomplishes. So, you know, whether it's completing, local, blocking, and then, you know, any of these other remarks. So I'm assuming, again, those remarks that we have would be added to the corresponding, you know, Python annotation. So there's like a field called annotation where we would put extra comments or remarks, and that would come in there. I mean, the format may look completely different.
Yep, agreed.
So who is the audience for this table? Is it us as MPI sort of API designers, or is it users or implementers, or all?
All. Yeah, users need to know things like things like blocking and non-blocking and local and non-local, because of the impact on the resources and whether things will deadlock, and coding practices in their application to make sure they don't introduce deadlocks and so on. They also need to know that it only does part of an operation. It's not, you know, and an implementation can check whether it is doing the right thing by looking in this table and figuring out, you know, have I done something that would block this process when it says it shouldn't, and so on. Yeah, I think it's everyone.
Right. So, I mean, I guess in my gut, I'm thinking that they should be looking at the chapter text and be able to get that information. And this table more serves as a check for us to make sure that all the relevant information is in the text.
I think both serve a purpose in that this is a really good quick reference. So, you know, having implemented some stuff, I could come here to look at the, and then if I saw something and I thought, hang on, I don't believe that, or that's not what I've done, I could then go to the text to verify the actual written sentences. This is a way of getting around some of the inconsistencies and ambiguities in natural language in the text itself. And, you know, simply plainly stating the effect of which semantics are applying and which ones are not applying to particular functions. There are enough exceptions in the natural language in the main document where things are, you know, there are multiple ways of saying exactly the same thing. You know, semantic X applies to this function, and semantic X applies to this other function, but there are two different sentences that mean the same thing. This table homogenizes those into the same statement, so you know it's clearer.
But is this table an
I think
appendix?
It is an appendix.
So, I mean,
Yeah, I was going to say it's the same rationale for having appendices and glossaries and cross references and whatnot at the end. In this first version, it was actually generated by hand. So it's a little different than most other appendices, glossaries, indices, and whatnot. In the future, when it's automatically generated, then Catherine, I would state what you said a slightly different way, that it should be the same information that's available earlier in the document, but perhaps presented in a slightly different, perhaps more concise, tabular, cross-referenceable way. So that if I know exactly what I'm looking for, say I'm an implementer, say I'm a user, doesn't matter who I am, I'm like, oh, I want to go see what the characteristics of MPI iProbe are. I can just go look at a nice, neat table. And with the Pythonization, that becomes very possible, because when you're defining the binding, you have to say, is this a local or a non-local function? Is this a foo function or a bar function? What are the characteristics of it, such that we can choose to render those out in the document if we want to as well. But then it also enables us to auto-generate something like this in an appendix, glossary, cross-reference, index, whatever kind of thing.
So Jeff, what you said I think is great. I mean, I think that's a great way to do the document. My comment with respect to this being an appendix is, as Dan was saying earlier, if there's disagreement between the text that we have in the main body of the document and what we have here in the appendix, you know, what do we do? I mean, I think the expectation with a document like this normally is that the appendix kind of loses the argument in a sense, because it's you know, a supplement in a sense to the main document.
But yeah, I'm not advocating that there should be any discrepancy, and if there is, then one of them should lose and we should fix it.
Yes. Then
I think
errata is needed.
Well, so you know what Jeff was saying, we can put this into the Pythonization of bindings. I mean, I would want to see these markers, you know, be there where we define the function itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
and I
definitely
think
a
having
future
them in
plan.
the table is helpful as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a future plan. I think somewhere around MPI 10, the rest of the document will also be auto-generated from the Python bindings, because the spec will be sufficiently machine readable that a machine can read the spec, you know, the Python bindings bit, and generate all the text. It'll generate the right sentences, and then it will be properly consistent. And we won't have to worry about the rest of the document. It'll be just the Python bindings. It might not be Python by then. But...
Let me try to summarize what I'm hearing to get some concrete things to move forward on. I think we all like the table. We all think the table itself is useful and a fantastic reference that clarifies a lot of things. I guess the question is, are we all comfortable enough to say we should have this in before we go through the auto generation part? Or should this be a separate document, paper, or one of the side documents while we do this still by hand? I think that's kind of the decision that I'm hearing. Are we sure enough of this to put this into the standard? Are we comfortable enough with that? And if not, do we want to preserve this somewhere else until we have an auto-gen version that we know is guaranteed right?
I would say we should
That's
have it.
Let's
exactly
throw
my
one
concern.
more consideration in here. We have plenty of non-binding stuff in the standard already, right? All our examples, lots of things. So we could very easily put this table in and say it's a non-binding helpful until we are able to auto-generate it.
Something that just came to my mind too, but perhaps we should put a disclaimer, just a sentence before that, right?
Stop.
Let me see what we have right now.
Catherine,
Yeah.
you wanted to say something too. Sorry, I think we cut you off.
Oh, that's okay. I was saying that's exactly my concern. Thanks, Martin.
If there is an inconsistency, we have to issue an erratum. Very simple. And errata are always going back to the original version. They are changing it from the beginning. Therefore, we do not want to keep any inconsistencies. And therefore, to write this can be inconsistent is not the solution. The solution is we have done a lot of work to have this table correct, and we keep the table correct until we have, and then we keep the Pythonization information correct, because that's the next stage to add this, and this may come in MPI 4.1 or 5, that we have this additional Pythonized information available. At the moment we don't have it, and then we can think about how we can proceed. But that should be done by the MPI 4.1 forum.
Martin, you wanted to add some text here, so I'm trying to figure out what is that you want to say.
Well, I think something like along what Jeff just said. This is provided for convenience for the reader, assembled with information from the normative text. But submit that the other text is the normative one, and this is just here for convenience.
Well, I mean, that's what an appendix means, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's redundant saying what an appendix means.
We ever say that for examples, for example, in the standard, that's basically why all of the examples, how all the that's the terms of reference for examples. But do we ever say that?
We also don't say it for Appendix A1. A1 is also completely handmade, the constants. And we have to keep the constants that we define during the MPI standard. We have to keep it correctly in the MPI, in the Annex A.1. Yeah? And
I think this is a little different in the sense that these are lists of things which don't necessarily assign any semantics to the individual items in the list. Whereas
it adds the data types and so on. It adds, and sometimes it adds constants that does not exist in the major part of the document. And that's okay. And we handle now Appendix A.1 for now more than 10 years, and we are able to do it. And it's important to have it correctly.
I'd argue that's a lot less complicated than the table.
Rolf, you're not arguing against auto-generating the table, are you?
No.
Okay.
If people are able to do it, yes, I will be happy to see it.
We should probably look
I
at
think it's
auto
essential
generating.
because maintaining this table manually is going to be a nightmare. It is very different than the rest of the appendices that we already have.
To be honest, I'm not so much worried
We are
about.
not, normally we don't change. When you talk about maintenance, you don't change the interface. This means if a routine is coming into the MPI standard, you are bringing it into the table, and then it's kept constant. It's never changing. It must not change. Otherwise, you something went really wrong. Therefore, the only thing what happens is a routine may become deprecated, then it's going out. No, if it's deleted, it's going out. And if new routines are coming, you bring them in. But you have to think about the big thing is when you bring them into the table, you can read again. What do you define? Have I defined whether this routine is collective or not? You really check for the text. I checked for all these routines. I checked for the text. I checked, is this information available?
Well, I humbly proclaim that none of us are as good as you are. And in a perfect world, this table will stay up to date. But we do not live in a perfect world. I will make mistakes. Others will make mistakes.
Yeah.
This table will get stale, probably in very subtle ways, which is worse than a glaring error that is easy to fix. And so, anyway, I've made my point a couple times. I don't think we're disagreeing. But I think the point goes all the way back to Catherine's original question, was that it is possible and potentially even likely that the format and exact content of this table may substantially change once it becomes auto-generated. And therefore, what is the forum procedure for that? And do we want to give ourselves, okay, so that was the original question. And then, I think what I proposed was maybe we should give ourselves an out and say, this table may change in a future revision.
Yes, that's true for the whole standard.
But, Jeff, look, we changed the bindings, how the bindings look in the standard, right? We didn't say that we are going to say, how this looks with all these headers will change in the future, right? We didn't say that, but we did it.
That's true. That's a fair point.
Right? Look, it looks different.
Someone made a point, which I didn't, I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but they said, well, what if, some other textbook refers to something in this table? I guess the question is, do we care? Like if they refer to something in 4.0 in that table, and then in 4.1, that table is completely and utterly different.
That's
we
fine.
as a forum care?
The table in 4.0 will still be exactly what they referred to.
Right.
So I have no problem with that.
And when we care, very simple, the forum is a democratic institution. There will be a vote. Very simple.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't disagree. I think Catherine was asking an excellent forward-looking question.
Yeah.
Do we want to anticipate a change? Anyway.
Right. But I think, based on our, past precedents, we have changed stuff and we have followed the same procedure. And, here is an example of that. This is not how it was laid out earlier. This is how it's laid out now. And it was done through the same process that we have followed. And if this formats need to change, then basically we'll follow the same process, right?
Sure. It should be pointed out, too, that the new renderings of the bindings are 38.3% better, too. So I think that's important.
Okay.
Yeah. We will exceed that with the new format for this table.
There you go.
Yeah. It must be at least 38.3% better.
So, Catherine, does this address your concerns or?
I still have a gut feeling, but I mean, I understand what people are saying about the usefulness to everyone, not just us as API designers. So my gut feeling is that, besides just formatting, there may be more substantial changes as we move forward and, try to auto-generate it and then discover maybe more problems. I think it's a great table. I think it's really useful. I kind of like Jeff's idea about putting a disclaimer at the top of the appendix. I hear what some people are saying about, well, appendices are not normative anyway. I don't know if that's true. So I don't know. How was that?
Fair enough.
Yeah, I tend to agree with the disclaimer. Yeah, I think it would be good for us just to be clear if there are any discrepancies that which piece of text wins. In terms of the auto generation, I mean, if you look through the table, there are some things that are contextualized. So, for routines that return a request, we have specified under those routines what the semantics are for operations that operate on the request. This seems to me like the kind of thing that would make auto generation tricky. Just in case we're really latching on to getting exactly this table with auto generation, right? That could be tricky, or it might have to be a completely different form in the sense that you'd have a big thing for wait, and then you'd say, well, this is what wait does with requests from different operations. I'm not sure exactly how we would do it, but that certainly would be a complicating factor.
I mean, it needs quite a complex type system because each type of request, the state of a request tells you something about the type of the request. It's much more complex than just, is it persistent or is it point to point? It's actually which stage it is. It goes, changes its type in a formal type system, and so then the MPI wait is an incredibly complex function because it takes in not just different types that we recognize now of requests, but also it depends on the input state of those parameters as to what it will do, and therefore it's the type of that function in a formal meaning for that phrase is hugely complex and will require a lot of work to try and formalize that in any way.
Yeah. And we know it will be 38% better.
38.3.
Oh, sorry.
At least.
Or larger. 38.3 or more. Better. Okay. And it's always when there are inconsistencies in the standard, we try to fix them through errata. Right. That's the job for errata. We did it for now 25 years. And this can be done sometimes we did it on the day when we finalized the standard.
By the way, do we have somewhere that appendices are non-normative? Because I can't find this.
Because, by definition, an appendix is a supplementary text. So,
Martin, that brings up the point that we should declare all things that are normative and non-normative by kind. Someone brought up the example that a rationale, I think Rolf was arguing, would be in a friendly way, that we decided if something was normative or not in one chapter, we could use it to determine a decision in another chapter. It's really useful, but if it's not normative, we can't rely on it as a reference from one chapter to another as a reason for doing things. And we were trying to rely on something in the one-sided chapter, which is really well written, but it's inside an advice, so it's not sure if it's normative. So that's in fact a point of order for the whole standard to define what's normative and what's not normative, like with those extra pieces.
Yes, but in principle, the MPI standard is very clear. The examples are not normative, very simple. And
if it doesn't say it for each kind of thing, then we need to add
only for examples. It's definitely saying, and I have not found the location where it's telling anything about rationals and so on. It only tells that that advice to users is text that mainly is that users are reading it, and advice to implementers is mainly text that is for implementers to reading it, and rationals are mainly text to understand why the text is there.
It's like a catechism. I understand that. Yeah. But the point is that we should say in the standard, when you read these words, they are part of the standard, versus when you read these words, they are what we call dictum or apocryphal, literally in the case of appendices, and they don't have the weight of law. And so if we actually said it for everything, then we couldn't argue anymore about it, versus maybe we don't all agree on the same meaning for everything.
But right? It's only telling for the examples. And all the rest of the text.
We don't know if the rule is anything that is forbidden not forbidden is explicitly permitted, or everything that is not explicitly permitted is forbidden. We don't know which way we judge things. So just because it's written down doesn't mean it's in standard as a normative text.
Tony.
We should say so. Just say so. Pick the answer you like.
Yeah.
We should just say so.
Tony.
I'm looking at ISO.org, and just trying to understand, what does the community think when they're writing a standard? If is an appendix supposed to be normative or not? And they have a document, how to write standards.pdf. And according to them, it can be normative or informative, right? And you just have to state which it is. So I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm just.
and it's very simple. If you find a difference between two locations in the MPI standard, one location is telling A and the other is telling non-A, then people should write a mail to our commenting email list, and the MPI forum should give an answer, should do a decision whether A or non-A is correct. And it should.
Rolf, I don't think anybody is disputing that. I think what Jim Dinan was trying to point out was that we go years between releases of things, and we go many months between releases of errata. And so if someone is reading it without that context, because the vast majority of MPI people are not on this call, he wants a general guideline for, this is what we probably meant. And Jim, I'm putting some words in your mouth. I hope that was okay.
But again, the general guideline does not help. When there's an inconsistency, it can be both. In principle, we wrote in MPI 3.1, in principle that which inconsistent we had. No, and in principle we had routines that were neither local nor non-local and such stuff. No? We had a lot of inconsistency, and we will have in the future inconsistencies. And as soon as there is a problem, people have to ask. And sometimes you can give a very fast answer because it's absolutely clear what is meant. And sometimes it may be a long discussion. And you cannot formalize this.
I think I agree with Rolf's point there that there is no way to guarantee that the main text is better than the information in the table or vice versa. I think if there is a discrepancy and they actually do state something different to each other, we have no way of prejudging which one is going to be the right way of, and they might both be wrong. Actually, once it's pointed out that there's an inconsistency.
Well, we already made a judgment call on that, though, right? Because we've done it both ways. That we know that examples are non-normative, but there have been times when the forum sided with the text, and there have been times when the forum sided with the example.
Yeah, so that proves the point. I think that we can't just prescribe that the document wins and is therefore correct. I mean, we can say you should put more weight on that. The appendix is informative, but it might be that the appendix has actually got the correct information in it, and the main text is the thing that's wrong. Once the question is asked and the discrepancy is noticed, that may be the resolution that the forum then comes to. A subsequent errata to fix that.
Kind of the opposite of what I was trying to say, though, because in those cases, we already had a dictum in place that examples are non-binding. And so until the forum can release an errata or a new version, the text by definition is correct.
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm agreeing with that, but technically the text would be the thing that's correct, but it doesn't define what was intended, right? And is therefore incorrect.
Yeah, so we're in a horrible position of completely and 100% agreeing with each other that there is no good answer here.
Okay, then we should continue and do not waste time with that.
That would be a novel approach.
but helpful.
Yes. So thank you, Jim Tynan, for wasting all of our time. I think that summarizes it. Yes.
Glad I could help.
My question to both, Martin, Catherine, Jim was, hey, what are we going to write there other than, what we already have? Because table is just, informative, right? So this is adding extra value for people, who want to see everything in one concise place. And,
So
we could say,
doesn't this make it an advice to users?
but that's what an appendix is, right?
No,
we don't say that.
You can say the whole standard that way, right?
No, I don't know. I should be held responsible for this entire discussion.
Just 38. Just 38.3%
I
of
am
it.
coming to. Yeah, I might be coming to the same conclusion as Rolf. There's no good answer here. This is a Kobayashi Maru. You can argue either way, and we're just going to have to put out the thing that we think is the most correct right now in all cases.
So
I'm sure there will be bugs in the future, and that will suck. But this is where we are.
Yeah. So I agree with Rolf that the table is correct. If there are, if anyone thinks that the table is not correct, then I would like them to point that to me. But I feel that the table is as correct as the text, maybe even better than the text itself, because the text could be interpreted, in multiple ways. But the table is binary, yes or no. Okay. So I strongly feel that the table actually is correct. It is even correct than the text that those functions describe.
Can I make a suggestion which perhaps is a compromise that everybody could perhaps live with? If I looked around and said we wanted to see whether appendices are binding or not. If we look in chapter 1, there's actually a description of each chapter as well as the appendices. There's an Annex A and it says language binding summary gives specific syntax in C and Fortran for all MPI functions, constants, and types. This text is actually no longer correct with the table because we're not doing syntax. This is semantics, right? So if we just add a sentence to that part and say something like, and provides a summary of the semantics of all MPI routines, then it's A, clear what this appendix is, and B, it says it's a summary. It's supposed to summarize the text. And that kind of gives a little bit preference to the actual text without having to go into what's binding or not. What do people think about that?
I'm good with that.
And you could say informative summary to make it, to use one of the two words that's either informative or normative, make it an informative summary. And then it's clear that that is subordinate to the main text. It might still be more correct than, but we can argue that later and make an errata to reflect that.
And then we wouldn't have to change Annex A, but we would have to do a quick addition to the ticket and add this to page 8 of the standard in the draft document. Catherine, Jim, what do you think about that?
That sounds good to me.
But you should not do the word informative because very similar. There are some constants and some information is only available in the annex. The declarations for the callbacks and such things.
Rolf, I don't want to change that part at all. Still gives specific syntax in C and Fortran and provides an informative summary of the semantics. The informative is only for the addition.
Okay, good.
Here.
Yeah.
So am I highlighting the correct portion? Okay.
Yes, that's what I've been looking for. Exactly, this part.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that needs to be updated anyway. So.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually a good point too. Because we didn't.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we only have 10 minutes left. Let's just wordsmith that sentence so we don't get into disagreement tomorrow again.
So what did you say provides the information?
The semantics of the MPI routines contained in this document. That's my opening sentence.
What's informative supposed to convey?
Not normative.
It's apparently the
Have we
alternative
here
word.
I think
the
we
MPI
could
forum.
we could argument about we could have an argument about what informative means. Maybe we want to say non-normative.
That part I don't personally have an opinion on, but whatever people think.
I have no problem with that.
Positive clings sounds better. It's positive.
The glass half full guy.
If you were saying you prefer informative,
Yes.
I think so. I don't think informative specifies that in the case of a disagreement in between what's there in the annex and what's in the main body of the text, I don't think it specifies that the annex is yeah, I don't think it's.
I don't think we have defined that informative is the opposite of normative.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
I think the main point is a summary. It summarizes the rest of the text.
Yeah.
That gives the text a clear advantage.
Yes.
My personal
Yes.
opinion.
Therefore, you don't need the word. Yes. The summary is enough.
You still need the and Puri, right? And provides a summary of the semantics of the impurity described in this document. Yep.
And provides summary of
Comma
the
before
semantics.
We need a comma, correct?
Described in this document. Yes.
You probably don't need the full stop at the end then, because you already got one. If we're going to be that picky.
Okay. and by the way, do I really need to say described in this document or described in the standard? What is the correct? Because the next sentence is described in the standard.
I don't have a
this
preference here. If not, we go with what Puri wants.
So the previous bit of the sentence already, the bit that's already there says all MPI functions, constant and types. Are we really then going to use procedures as a synonym of? I mean,
functions.
It
Yep.
functions.
Good point.
In this standard.
In this standard, okay. Because here, since the previous version of the standard, okay, in this standard, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Is everybody okay with this? Does it make it better? 38.4% better?
I'm good with this.
I'm also good with this.
I'm okay with this.
And we are 5 minutes before 7.
That can give at least 2 more tickets, right?
Yeah, more time for arguments.
No. Okay.
Okay.
All
I'm
right.
going to stop sharing the screen and give control back to Wesley.
All right. So I guess, Martin, you want to do a wrap up?
Well, there's not much to wrap up. So I will, assuming this is what we're going to go with, I'm going to put this on as another no vote for this reading. And with that, I would complete the reading of the ticket 96. And if there's no objection, then I guess it will come up for a vote in the next meeting, whenever we decide the next meeting is. Is that, anybody object to that, or anybody still concerned with something?
Do you mean a second no vote for terms, or because we do already have a no vote for terms on the agenda?
Yeah, I think those are separate issue. I would just give you the second one for that, to be really honest.
I mean, we can just vote them all at the same time. You don't have to announce no votes individually.
Yeah, we could do that too.
As the person who has to write all the scripts to parse this crap, I vote
All right.
for that, because it's going to be real tough.
I'm going to put it on your ballot too, that you vote for that. So we're going to expand the no vote for ticket 96 for the local and non-local, and this addition to the appendix then. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it doesn't make much sense to start something else now in the last 4 minutes. I think it's really good that we got through this ticket. So we'll start tomorrow again at 9 o'clock Central Time, whatever that is in your respective time zones. We probably should try to get we are voting at 9:30, so I think it makes sense to use the first half hour to read a couple of the erratas to get them to start getting them in, and then after the voting block, we'll continue with the other bigger issue, the ticket 120, and then we'll go do erratas for the rest of the days.
Okay.
Good to everybody.
Okay.
In this case,
Thank
have
you,
a
guys.
good evening, night, morning, depending on where you are. And then talk to you tomorrow, same time.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.